no doubt based on some of our earlier conversations that I'm sure you would imagine I've got some disagreement with some of the stuff we've talked about here. That won't come as a surprise. I'm looking at a number here in the Duquesne City School District. In fiscal year 10-11, their budget was $9.8 million. This is what they get from the Commonwealth, correct?
In basic subsidy.
In basic subsidy. In basic subsidy plus the supplements. In the governor's proposed budget, their reduction is to $5.78 million. So it's 9.8 to 5.7. That's about a $4 million cut in Duquesne City. Not your wealthiest school district, all right? In fact, a very challenged district economically. How can you or the governor justify that kind of cut? That's a $4 million cut.
The cut related specifically to Duquesne, and by the way, Duquesne was a problem 15 years ago. Duquesne's always been a difficult school district as far as financial situation was concerned because of the tax base. I'm very familiar with the Duquesne school districts, in part because the issue hasn't been solved as far as Duquesne is concerned. So we do have to look very aggressively on that school district in particular. There were certain line items that were in the budget that were associated specifically to that one school district based upon its empowerment status or its distressed school district status. We do have to go back and look at the 400 or 500 kids that are in that school district, remaining in that school district, and there's only an elementary and I believe middle school program out there now, and have another look as to how we can help that school district address this issue. But the problem with the line item in part is because the problem hasn't been solved for years. We're now dealing with an issue with Duquesne School District that dates many years, that goes back many years, and it's the culmination of this issue. I'm working with people in the Allegheny Intermediate Unit in Duquesne to take a look at this to make sure that we have opportunities available for all those kids, as great as opportunity as possible in this new budget reality.
I mean, from 9.8 to 5.7 is a $4 million cut, and I understand this is a problem that's been going on for a while, but it really, it troubles me that the problem has been going on for a while. That's troubling, but it also troubles me in terms of how we can imagine there's going to be any kind of way to achieve any kind of movement forward with almost a 50% cut, almost, not quite, but almost a 50% cut in their budget. Then I go to Chester Upland. 10-11, their budget was $58.9 million. 11-12, their budget is $39.6 million projected. A $19.3 million cut. Again, and I know there's been problems with Chester Upland for a while. I understand that, all right? But I'm trying to get at, with such a significant cut. This is not 2%, 3%, 5%. This is, you know, math was not necessarily my greatest subject, but this is a pretty dramatic cut. How do we imagine that in any way, shape, or form we can have any kind of success with that kind of reduction?
I've been working with the leadership of Chester Upland. They were in my office, and I've talked with the superintendent, the school board president, the business officers, and others about Chester Upland, and trying to find the resources available to them to address some of the systemic problems that are taking part in that school district that go back to the financial issue. They're not separate, by the way. The academics and finances are intertwined in being able to turn that school district around. And I understand also the frustration of the people at the local level for Harrisburg's involvement in Chester Upland, for the better or for worse, for a number of years, and trying to figure that out. I am well aware of the problem, the situation, working with them to try and find a solution.
I'm just, and I appreciate that, and I'm glad you're having these direct meetings, and we do appreciate that, and it has been going on for a long time. I get that. I'm just trying to figure out how, especially with these communities who have very limited tax base, where they can make up for this on the local level because of their economic reality that has been around for decades, how they can get through these kind of dramatic cuts. I don't want to talk about vouchers right now, but I will talk about something that I see is quite interesting kind of thing that has occurred here financially. Poor school districts obviously are hit the hardest in this process. You talked about it because they get more money from the Commonwealth.
Yes.
But they get more money from the Commonwealth because they're the poor school districts, and they have no or limited local tax base to pull their dollars from. But I also noticed that in the 144 schools that are targeted in SB1, as these are the schools that would be voucher schools, their funding is almost cut twice as much as other schools. So here's these 144. They're targeted to be voucher schools, which probably means kids will come out of those schools to go to some kind of private school, okay? If that private school will accept those students, and if that private school will accept the $700 or $7,500 that will come out of for those students. But then these schools, in the way the budget is projected right now, a handful of these kids come out to go to private schools, and then these schools are left. And these 144 schools, based on our calculations, they lose almost twice as much as the other schools across the Commonwealth with respect to loss in funding. So they're already in economically disadvantaged situations. They're already poor schools, economically challenged. Some of these kids are going to come out of these schools, and the rest of the kids are left there with almost twice as less funding as. Help me out with that.
Well, Senator, this budget and what we're attempting to do with the budget in the time that we're at, when you look at all the resources going to all the schools in the Commonwealth, and particularly those that are the lowest performing also get and the poor with the populations with the poorer schools with the poorer kids also get many more resources from the federal government on top of the state funding as well, than the Title I and the Title resources that are there as well. And the school improvement grant programs, which is additionally targeted for these school districts coming from the federal government, up to $2 million per building. We can estimate, and you can make estimates as to how many kids are going to exit any specific one of the schools that are identified in any choice proposal. I think, and when I look at this, I'm more concerned about whether or not those kids are going to be getting the quality education if they're forced to stay there. Now, if those children choose to leave, the parents of those children choose to leave to pursue a higher quality education opportunity elsewhere, then the kids that will remain there, we're not abandoning those schools. It's just the opposite. We continue to provide additional resources. The state is still funding kids in those schools based upon a weighted average that takes into account their poverty rate. They still get additional dollars there from federal Title I and federal Title II services. They still receive supplemental educational opportunities. So even though some of the money leaves and goes with the child to the new location, to the new school, the bulk of the money still stays in that school, even by your own calculations, I would imagine.
Well, but I understand. But here's the problem. But see now, 91 of these schools out of 144 happen to be in the Philadelphia School District. The Philadelphia School District is talking about losing, what is it, $300 million? $300 million just in state assistance. Probably a total cut with the federal dollars, the stimulus dollars, which everybody knew was going. Everybody knew that was going. You know, this is well over 10%, maybe close to 20%, all right, of the school district's total budget. Now, what I have based in front of me is that, and this probably goes to your issue about money doesn't necessarily equate to performance, but we've increased money from the state and the local level in Philadelphia, and reading scores, testing scores, objective testing scores in Philadelphia have gone from 23.9% to over 50.7% in reading. Not good enough, not where we want to be, but a dramatic increase from 2002 to 2010. In math scores, 19.5% to 19.5% to 56.6% in math scores between 2002 and 2010. That's I mean, and as you know, increased funding, increased focus on tutorial programs and after-school programs and programs that I think nationally shown to have an impact on student outcome. So then focus dollars, focus programs, increase in performance, but yet with the you and the governor's budget proposal, we're talking about dramatic reductions.
Senator, a couple things about Philadelphia School District and specifically. Again, my second lap. During my first lap, Philadelphia School District, as you know, was spending about $1.6 billion. Now we're 3.1, I believe. The enrollment, even when you capture kids who are in the charter schools in Philadelphia, the enrollment has gone down. So we've seen a spike up in spending, almost double, a lowering of enrollment in the school district. So per pupil expenditures would go up, you would imagine would go up. When you look at the academic achievement gains, most of it happened at the early part of the decade. When you look at
these numbers, I'm sorry, Mr. Secretary, I don't mean to cut you off, but these numbers don't necessarily indicate that.
From 2002 to 2006, 2007 is when the highest academic achievement gains occurred. Is that correct?
No, I'm looking at just in, and I'll share this with my chairman.
I'm happy to be corrected.
Okay, but I'm looking at from 2007 to 2010, 44.9 to 56.6. Okay, and now without any doubt, from 2002 to 2007, it was 19.5 to.
So went up 30 points
44.9, but that's a few more years. That's a few more years added to the mix there.
So
but the point is that there's more investment, more focus, more targeting, okay, at the local level and at the state level to impact the performance of these students. They're impacting. They're doing better. Things are changing. You and I, when we had our private conversation in the office, we both said that, you know, some positive direction going on here.
We are.
Okay? And now what I see is that the rug is being pulled out. Now, I understand there's fiscally difficult times. The problem that I have here is justifying when you build a budget, building it on the backs of kids, especially poor kids, who are defenseless in this whole process. If they had a local tax base to raise dollars from, that's one story. But these kids, over 2/3 of the school, as you know, maybe even higher, I think it's about 80% of the school kids in Philadelphia, it's a poverty reality that we're dealing with. But then there's Duquesne and Chester and all the rest of them. That's the problem that we have here. I think for many of us is pulling the rug out as there's some dramatic improvements going on. Where's my other page? Right there. This one right here. I have to have my glasses on so I can read it. And this is where between 2002 and 2010, 75% of Pennsylvania students are performing at grade level or above. Economically disadvantaged students scoring proficient or above have increased 25.4% in math and 19.4% in reading. We've even, with the investments and targeted focus, we've even made increases for cohorts of students that have been difficult to work to have progress in for decades, as you would admit. The African American students, Hispanic students, in the last 7 years, last 8 years, proficiency levels for African American students have gone up from 20%, oh, this is awfully small, 20% to over 45%.
Mm-hmm.
That's, and now you give me the bigger one. Okay. All right. You know, so this notion about money doesn't, you know, the implication is that money doesn't necessarily make a difference, or you just can't look at money. And I agree, you just can't look at money. You got to put it in what works, okay? And I think we've seen that over the last several years. So, you know, I don't mean to give a speech, but I do think it's necessary to make a point in the light of everything that I've heard earlier today, that as we build this budget, this Commonwealth, I'm very concerned about having it built on the backs of the children who are, have shown with appropriate investment that they will respond. And then this next juxtaposes, can you point to any significant increases of educational achievement in voucher situations?
Senator, you can point to educational achievement for kids who are making choices. You certainly can. There's no voucher bill in Pennsylvania. There isn't one in Pennsylvania to make that argument. There are other states that are also looking at using choice options available to parents, and the research on that is strong on the parental satisfaction and the returns that they're getting on that dollar invested. So yes, you can say that there's studies that point in one direction. Others, the opponents can pull out their studies as well. The bottom line for me, when I come back and revisit issues related to Philadelphia, there's a couple issues in Philadelphia. Some of it deals with certainly the academic portion of it. And the academics, when you talk about going from 1.6 to 3.1, and you still have more than half of some segments of your population who can't read at grade level, then what's the magic number? Is it 6.2? I don't know. I think what we need to do is to make a greater effort to get some quality opportunities, not just for the kids in making choices, but attracting the teachers into the profession, into the classroom, evaluating them, and rewarding them to levels that have never been seen before in Pennsylvania's classrooms. I think that's key, a key initiative that's actually being pursued by many on the left as much as they are by many on the right. But we don't have the structure in place because we're so fixated on money. There are many other ways to crack this nut to help solve the problem of academics for kids. That's the underlying, that's the bottom line issue for me, is what drives instructional improvement. I don't care from my perspective if what leads to educational outcomes doesn't cost a dime. But we always seem to run to that answer. It costs a dime. It costs $1. It costs $1 million. It costs $1 billion.
This is America. Money is relevant.
And that's part of the conversation about public education, and has always been about the conversation of public education. How much money we spend.
If I could just ask one or two more questions. I want to flip to higher education. Help me understand what the math is, how families are supposed to, with dramatic cuts in higher education spending, how families are supposed to deal with what could potentially be some very huge increases in tuitions. How is a student and a family supposed to respond to that?
We're very concerned that the first thing that, excuse me, would happen on the part of a school, of a post-secondary institution would immediately turn to tuition increases. And I think one of the things that you've seen from all the leaders from the various sectors that have appeared before you over the past couple of weeks is that they will do everything that they possibly can to keep tuition increases down. We applaud that, and we work with them on that. So that should be the highest priority I'm working with the members of the various institutions and leadership of the various institutions to make sure that that's minimal.
And that's good. Understand that even with work on that effort, and all the presidents, the chancellor sat here, I guess, about a week ago at this desk, Chancellor Kavanaugh from the state system, and talked about how they would try to modulate things and reduce spending inside, and our presence of our state relateds all said the same thing. But we still, again, create a dynamic. Again, it's the architecture of this budget is a dynamic that invariably has a situation where students will have to pay not just 2% more, or 3% more, or 4% more, dramatically higher numbers. We've been down this path in years in the past where there's been either held flat or marginal decreases in state funding, and universities have had to make double-digit increases. And I know at the state system, we've had significant drivers to force spending cuts internal to the institution. Juxtapose that also with the fact that the federal government is talking about cutting back Pell Grants. So I don't understand, again, the architecture of this budget that's based on essentially in an economic environment where families are making less than what they made 10 years ago, all right, how we can ask families to think about dramatic increases in tuitions with the potential, and you know this, you know how higher education works. If there's reductions in classes, then what will happen is a course that, you know, a student might not be able to take now because they have conflicts with another course, they may have to go to school an extra year or an extra 2 years to be able to accommodate getting in all of their subject matter so they can graduate. How does this work?
Senator, I mean, those are issues that are not specific to Pennsylvania and the relationship between the Pennsylvania universities and the state. If you actually look across the country at what's happening with 5- and 6-year graduation rates across institutions, regardless of the funding mechanism. I've lived in Maryland, I live in Maryland right now, and they fund their university system differently than Pennsylvania does, which may be differently than other states do. They are still dealing with the problem of 5-year or 6-year, and that has a lot to do with how post-secondary schools collectively operate. Part of the other issue, I mean, when you think about it, a 5th year is a tuition tax on middle-class America. Mm-hmm. And so what we should do is move as much as we can back to the 4-year graduation rate whenever possible. Part of it, there's some merit to some of the arguments that they talk about, the different workload that parents have, or excuse me, that the working student has to do. But there's been working students probably since I went to college, since you went to school,
right,
since everybody, people worked their way through college and were able to get it through in 4 years.
Right. I understand that. But my concern is in this question, in this point is when we create these kind of dramatic cuts, we create an environment where, and students have talked about this, the presidents have talked about this, we create an environment where, okay, we don't want to raise tuition rates. We're going to have to do restructurings on campus. We may have to close out some programs or limit the number of professors teaching and the availability of some classes. We create an environment where there's obviously a clash in the availability of a particular class, which then puts a student in a situation where they have to spend more time in school, thereby incurring more debt.
But that clash is already there. I mean,
I get that. But this makes it worse. This makes it worse. I'm going to stop right now because my chairman is grabbing the microphone and I'm going to stop.